spent so many years with Total War that seeing a setting as colossal and merciless as Warhammer 40,000 finally merge with the franchise feels strangely inevitable. Like watching a storm that you know has been building for half a lifetime finally break open on the horizon. When the announcement trailer finally appeared last night, but a part of me reacted immediately with excitement, but another part of me had this quieter, more reflective response. Of course this was coming. The mood of the reveal, the pacing and the imagery of the empires in decline and armies marshalling beneath skies that churn by fire, all of it matched what I had been imagining for years. The trailer didn't just feel like a shock, it felt like recognition. This was a convergence of two worlds I've lived inside for decades, both grim and monumental in their own ways. What I kept returning to whilst watching was how the tone of the reveal managed to respect the grimdark foundation of the 40,000 verse without drifting into empty theatrics. The voiceover carried the sense of ancient inevitability, the kind of fatalism that really defines the setting far more than any single faction could. Warhammer 40k's core truth, that war is not just ever present but structurally baked into the universe, is something that a lot of adaptations gloss over. Here in this trailer it feels like Creative Assembly understood that the darkness isn't garnish, it's the very shape of reality. Seeing that represented with such cool confidence made me think they really are approaching the game from inside the lore, rather than trying to wrap their engine around a setting that it wasn't built for. The imagery really struck that same chord for me. The opening shots of the void, the slow reveal of ships drifting over a planet's surface, the flare of orbital fire, to immediately establish that this isn't a battlefield-focused game alone. This is a conflict that spans worlds and systems. As someone who's played Total War since Shogun and Medieval, I've always felt the series excelled when it combined a micro-scale tactical decision-making with a real macro-scale empire management. Warhammer 40k by its nature pushes that second layer outward into something close to mythic scale. Entire planets exist as a single point of conflict. Governments encompass millions of sub-departments and trillions of lives. Armies are measured in waves of bodies rather than battalions. The trailer's quiet insistence on scale was honestly one of the moments that hit me the hardest, because it told me the team understood the dimension of what they were rising to meet. Then there were the factions that were shown. Space Marines stepping out of drop pods, Orc rampages cutting across shattered terrain. Very, very interesting stuff. Astra Militarum forces struggling for control under a barrage of fire. It wasn't the surface level visuals that interested me, it was the way the trailer framed them. The camera angles used for the Space Marines, for example, made them feel weighty and deliberate. That unstoppable walk through incoming fire has always been central to their depiction. The Orcs weren't just green brutes, they were a tide and environmental phenomenon, as much as an army, especially those really amazing looking mechs. Each shot focused on a faction being itself, not a cinematic approximation. That felt important because Total War only thrives when factions aren't interchangeable, when each has a strategy and a thematic identity that carries through from the lore into the choices players make. Seeing that expressed so confidently in a 2-minute trailer told me that Creative Assembly likely understands that these aren't just different skins for the same mechanics, they are different philosophies for war itself, different ways of thinking about existence. The more I sat with the trailer, the more I realised how much it echoes the evolution of Total War itself. The franchise started in history, in the messy human stories of emperors, daimos, kings and generals, all the way from Rome and all the way through till now. Then it leaned into myth with the Warhammer Fantasy trilogy and found a way to make that myth breathe inside its systems. Warhammer 40,000 feels like the next logical extension of that trajectory. This setting isn't historical or mythic alone. It's apocalyptic, metaphysical, relentlessly ideological, and honestly, the most natural evolution of the fantasy setting in my opinion. Warhammer 40,000 is what happens when the mythic becomes history, and history never ends because the universe refuses to let it. I'll be honest, as someone who grew up playing Rome Total War absolutely to death with thousands of hours, I didn't always think this transition could work. For years I wondered whether Creative Assembly would ever be able to adapt a setting where the smallest engagement might involve weapons capable of shelling an entire square kilometre. And then I started thinking about what Total War actually does best. It isn't exactly about scale, it's about representation. It's about showing the feeling of battle, the tension between the armies, the decision points that determine whether a province, or in this case a planet, stays under your control or falls into ruin. When viewed that way, Warhammer 40k isn't too big for Total War. Total War is finally big enough for Warhammer 40,000. The gameplay glimpses were brief but telling. A ruined cityscape where Astra Militarum forces held a line against an Orc advance. A Space Marine squad breaking from cover firing disciplined volleys into charging Xenos. A Walker's silhouette highlighted by explosions behind it. Each shot framed combat not as a spectacle, but as tactical geometry. Positioning, momentum, suppression and shock. This is exactly what I wanted to see. Hints that the cinematic battles aren't merely dressing for marketing, but real expressions of battlefield dynamics the player will have to wrestle with. There was something else too, the pacing. Total War trailers often emphasize chaotic movement, but this one was built around contrasts, stillness and eruption, order and collapse. That is extremely Warhammer 40k in my opinion. The setting has always thrived on the tension between imperial rigidity and chaos that constantly seeks to tear it apart. Even the editing reflected that rhythm. I don't know if this was intentional or simply an artistic flourish, but for me it worked. It spoke to me in a way that felt surprisingly personal. There's a moment where the camera pans over a regiment digging in, and just for a second, the world feels quiet before the assault crashes into them. That kind of beat is what makes 40,000 emotionally grounding rather than just visually loud. The more informal part of my brain, the one that's still just a fan who's been waiting for this moment for about 20 years, reacted with something closer to awe. Literally, when I saw the trailer on my YouTube homepage, my mouth just dropped open. It was unbelievable. I've joked with friends for years about this, a Total War 40k game. We'd send each other mock-ups of hypothetical campaigns. We'd talk about what Space Marine doctrines might look like or how the Orc morale might work in a Total War system. So when the trailer finally appeared in reality, it hit me in that deep teenage sense of I knew it was possible, but I didn't think we'd actually get it. It honestly felt pretty surreal. There's a moment where the camera follows a bolt round into a target and I caught myself grinning in a way that reminded me of watching the Warhammer Fantasy trailer for the first time. I don't usually react that way anymore. Too many years, too many trailers, but this one really broke through all of that noise for me. The reveal also hints at something much larger in terms of strategic scale. Multiple planets, each a contested front. For Total War, this is a conceptual leap. The idea of managing not just a single world but an entire planetary theatre opens up new layers of logistics, faction politics, and escalation possibilities. In 40k lore, wars aren't isolated, they bleed across entire systems. A conflict on one world can trigger uprisings in another, or draw fleets away from a border that was supposed to be guarded. If the game manages to capture even a portion of that cascade effect, it could become the deepest strategic sandbox Total War has ever attempted. I'm thinking, if I'm just speaking off the top of my head for a minute, off script, if we're getting battles on planets, and then we're also managing cities on planets, and then we're also managing planets in sectors, and then we're also managing planets in systems, and then we're also managing systems in sectors, that is going to be absolutely incredible, in my opinion. Not just like fantasy, where, for example, you'd fight your battles on the battle maps, and then you'd have your cities. The cities would be in regions, and then you'd have your whole empire, which is just made up of regions. And then you're contesting one world, essentially. One map of one world. But imagine if we have battles on planets, and then that entire map has regions and cities, and then you're also contesting worlds, and there's hundreds of worlds. I mean, this could potentially be incredible. I'm not saying that this will happen, but if that was to be the case, I mean, my God, can you imagine? So Warhammer 40,000's political landscape is also a decent fertile ground. It'll be interesting to see how they implement potential politics into the game. I think it should be a big part of the game, really, considering the Imperium, the bureaucratic behemoth that it is. Governing even one sector might involve managing intrigue, cults, planetary governors, supply lines, and populations that may turn to despair or chaos. I think translating that into a strategic layer, if they choose to, it could create the most thematically resonant take on empire management the franchise has ever had. Typically, it's been quite basic in previous games, so we'll see. Meanwhile, factions like the Orcs have almost the opposite approach. They don't manage, they just accumulate resources. Their entire strategic logic is just expanse through violence. It's going to be very interesting, in my opinion, to see how all of this develops. But I kept revisiting the trailer later and watching it in slower detail, and I was noticing quite a few really interesting details. Just for example, the flicker of the void shields during an orbital sequence and the insignias on the Space Marine pauldrons, hinting at the chapters that they might represent. Obviously, we're probably going to get the Ultramarines as we always do. None of these are confirmed details, of course, but the attention to the aesthetic gave me real confidence that they know what they're doing at Creative Assembly for this. Obviously, they've had vast experience with Warhammer Fantasy, and this just feels like a really natural evolution of that. I think the thing that's lingered with me the most after the initial excitement of watching it a few times, I think it really manages the scale and implication of the actual fighting itself. There's no real vitriolic kind of zeal from the Space Marines. There's just that expectancy that they do the job and they carry on. I thought it was that it just adds that grimness of there's no real victory. It's just the next battle and the next battle. Once they won that fight, they just walked off and continued. No real celebration at all. I thought that was interesting. It doesn't really reveal full rosters or campaign mechanics. It's just giving us a really nice little taste of what we could get. It's going to be interesting to see how many races we get. Space Marines and Orcs obviously confirmed there. But are we going to get Eldari? Are we going to get Chaos? Are we going to get Necrons? Are we going to get everything else? Are we going to get sub-factions? Are we going to get Sisters of Battle? I mean, judging by what they did with Fantasy, it's going to be a never-ending sequence of add-ons with new factions. Sisters of Battle, for example. Are we going to get Imperial Guard? Probably in the first iteration of the game. There's just so much that could be going on, to be honest, and I'm really excited about it. At the minute, I'm kind of waffling because I'm just thinking about how many the implications of this are incredible for me. Total War has always been a series about watching empires rise and fall, about directing soldiers who exist at the boundary between abstraction and narrative, but I think Warhammer 40k is a setting built on ruins, on civilizations collapsing under the weight of their own history. And seeing these two philosophies converge, even for a few minutes in the trailer, made me feel that quiet thrill that only comes when a match between a theme and a system finally clicks into place. Like, imagine you're playing as the Space Marines and you're rebuilding the Imperium's form of glory, or you're playing as the Orcs and you take over the entire world. It's going to be absolutely incredible to witness. You're basically going to be living out all of those fantasies, quite literally. You've always had about Warhammer, where you just take an army and just take over the entire world. It's just going to be fascinating. I think if the game can maintain that tension, the mix of personal stakes and cosmic scale, then it could be one of the defining moments for both franchises. I think this could finally be the Warhammer 40k game that we've all been waiting for, in terms of that galactic scale and also being able to actually fight armies against each other. I think it could be the point where Total War stops being a series that adapts settings and becomes one that fully embraces the magnitude of a fictional verse. And for me, as someone who's followed every iteration, every experiment, every expansion of every game, this reveal doesn't just feel exciting, it feels like, right, the natural conclusion, the natural next step in a journey that we've all been on, enjoying Warhammer and enjoying Total War for such a long time. And I think seeing it unfold, it just gives me such confidence that we're going to be getting a really good game. I think Creative Assembly are in the place now where they're going to get this completely right, in my opinion, and it's going to be pretty goddamn fun. I remember 10 years ago when Warhammer Fantasy came out and I thought, damn, I wish that was 40k. And 10 years later, we're finally getting the game, so very interesting times ahead. If Creative Assembly managed to deliver on what they promised in this trailer, then this is a moment that won't just be a reveal, it's going to be the beginning of a new era in strategic gaming. A place where the grim darkness of the far future finally finds its proper scale in the grandest battlefield Total War has ever attempted. This archive has now been fully decoded. Continue your journey with the video displayed on screen. The vast wealth of the archives continues to reveal new knowledge of the dark history of the 40k verse. In the grim dark of the far future, there is only war.